coin toss, I get to go first. It was I was very excited when Tina asked me to write about the beginning. In the beginning, we met, and she showed me a layout, laser prints. I'd have to wait until the show and the book to see the actual work. And then Tina and I talked a little bit, and one of the things that really stood out from that conversation was we both began to seriously make photographs in the same year, 1976. And I thought, how amazing that we were trying to figure out what a photograph was at the same time. And even though we came to very different conclusions, we both started looking at photographs and thinking about the medium, what is that, almost 50 years ago. 1976 was a very kind of transitional period. The 70s were very transitional when the sort of giants of the early part of the 20th century were fading, and this new crop of photographers were coming along. I'm completely self-taught, so I was looking at magazines and exhibitions. And I think Tina had the benefit of actually working with some of the people that I was reading about. But nevertheless, we both started making photographs in the late 1970s. And as I thought about that period and sort of the evolution to where we are now, photography has changed in many ways dramatically, and then other ways hasn't changed at all. But on the materials front, it's changed dramatically. And so I'll let Tina talk a little bit about how these pictures came to be, but there's a 50-year lag between making maybe some prints, but not a lot, some maybe were never printed, to now. But this material history of photography, using film, working in the darkroom, were all things that were a rite of passage for photographers in the 70s. That practice is, it's available to photographers, but now it's not necessary, and many younger photographers move through it quickly. But for Tina and me, it was, there are all kinds of frustrations, especially working with color. So the opportunity to begin to think about Tina's work and the work that was possible at that period was the exciting thing about writing small text. I'm not a writer. I struggled to write, but I also wanted to begin to think about some of the sort of practical things that Tina might have been working with, kind of film and paper, and also the sort of vision that her work, her early work especially, projects, and how it changes. Because if you know Tina Barney's work, you know that it's, she works with a large format camera, she directs her pictures to some extent. Two things that in the 1970s were completely not really options for many photographers. So how Tina got there it was exciting to see and hear her talk to me about how that transition from her beginnings to the early 80s when she becomes Tina Barney. But anyway, as a kind of introduction, I guess, there's much more to say.
Oops. Well, I have something to say. Let's see.
Hello?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Well, I met Jim because friends of mine introduced me to him, and he was teaching in LA, and I sat in on his class, and it was such a thrill. I sort of was jealous because I'd never gone gone to college. I never had an education like that. My photographic education was in ski resort, Sun Valley, Idaho. And that was very specific, but Jim says that he never really taught, but now he's teaching at Princeton, and that was my first introduction, is his mind and the different ways he thought about photography. The next thing I just want to talk about is, the first book I ever published was with Gerhard Steidl in Germany, and that was in the mid-'80s, and I was not in the photograph. I was sort of an outsider, and I would just observe. And one of the things I've learned quickly is the coolest, most important thing when you do a book is finding a cool writer. It was like it became a fad, and maybe that's a fad through the history of making books. But in photography, it really was more so. The problem is, if you have, one of the things that's really scary is, let's say you have a dream of who you want to write about. You think, well, maybe they don't like my work, or maybe they don't like me. So you have that problem. The other problem is, what if that person writes something and you don't like it? Then what do you do? And that's always the biggest fear of all. With Jim, I didn't even know that you didn't write, but I think that's a lot of baloney, because I think you are a great writer. But I just had this hunch that the way you think about photography was going to be a thrill for me. It was something that I was almost more excited about than even doing the book. But the collaboration with Jim and Todd Lippy, who's here, who's the designer, was my kind of dream. I just want to point out some of the sentences that Jim wrote, because they were kind of like going to heaven to me. There are beautiful sequences of photographs with cobalt passages. Now, just the word cobalt, okay? Pools, beaches, houses at sunset, skies above golf courses, a lovely overexposed image of a touch football game where blue bleeds into all the shadows. How about that sentence? Because you think, okay, how do you write about an image? Not an easy thing to do. And what this did to me is it really made me feel as if I could see the photograph. The word cobalt is so beautiful. The fact that Jim, being a photographer, realized that the photograph was overexposed. Then I just want to go down to some other things that Jim pointed out was his knowledge of photography. Knowing that film that I use then, the 35mm film, the negative film, what that film does, the pixelation of it, that I think a lot of photographers don't know today. And it was really like using a very specific medium that had become extinct almost. And Jim's understanding of that he described so well in this wonderful essay that he wrote. Let me look at something else. Also the camera, those differences in using a 35mm camera. I think a lot of young people today don't even know what that is. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's kind of an old-fashioned camera. It's used quickly. That makes a big difference in the kind of sketch-like pictures that I took. Let me read some other sentences too. Here. We looked at a photograph of a group covering their eyes as they faced the early morning sun. I told Tina the photograph reminded me of the origin story of George Balanchine's plotless ballet Serenade. On the first day of rehearsal, the sun beamed into the rehearsal space, momentarily blinding the young dancers. To shield their eyes, the dancers put their hands to their faces, just as they do in Tina's photograph, and the Balanchine choreographed this gesture in the opening sequence of the ballet. Balanchine's record of this gesture, Tina does as second nature throughout the beginning. So, Jim, thank you for those wonderful words, but I could read them over and over again. It's such an ego trip. I've learned from them too. And all the way down the line, from the way I took the pictures, the camera I used, the colors I choose, where I photograph, I feel as if you sort of marked that in this essay. What I want to point out to you is, I think you've asked, how does Tina do this? I think one of the things I have to point out is that I had no idea what I was doing technically most of the time. And I think that that's very important because I was surrounded by Mark Klett, who was one of my teachers, who was a perfectionist beyond words. And I was the polar opposite of that. And I think there's something about not knowing a lot about the camera, printing, how to use a camera, made me looser. And even when I went to 4x5, I mean, really, I was sort of a clumsy, sort of naive photographer. I really broke all the rules, but I always knew what I wanted. I think a lot of artists don't know really what they want. They know all the technical parts of the medium that they choose, but they don't really know what they want. I so clearly knew what I wanted, and I just had to somehow get it. No matter what I did, you know. Anyway.
When I looked at the book this afternoon, when I looked at the book this afternoon, I noticed that, you know, it seems kind of straightforward. You started in black and white, and those pictures seem a little bit. I mean, the color work is 2 years later. It starts around 78. At least I couldn't find many color photographs before late 77. So you start in black and white, and then you move to color. And I wanted to ask you, you know, well, first of all, color photography in 1970, the 70s was a challenge. Most people, if they worked in color, shot slides. Many people did. But slides, you project them, and you can't really print them. Printing color slides was very difficult. Color negative film was not as maybe colorful as slides. So, but I think, you know, Kodak and Fuji and Agfa were working to make the color film better in the 70s. So why did you, or how did you get the idea to switch over to working in color?
It was very simple because I was at the Sun Valley Arts Center, and Peter DeLore was my teacher for black and white, and he left, and Mark Klett became the teacher, and Mark taught color. And so that's what was offered. I kind of didn't even want to print in color, but that's where it all began.
Mm-hmm. And I think you told me when we met the first day, you actually did some darkroom color prints.
Oh, very much so. Oh, I printed a lot.
Yeah, which is not for the faint of heart, right?
Well, I'm glad you said that. I just, you know, no, because I spent hours in Sun Valley in between skiing, printing, but then when I moved back to Rhode Island, I got my own darkroom and would spend every day for years doing my own prints.
Mm-hmm. In color?
In color.
Wow.
You know, with the
Yeah,
thing
the
that
rotary,
rolled and
yeah.
the little rotating thing. Oh yeah, so I made, I still have those prints. They're still, you know, in good condition. They still look good. Made the chemicals myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I don't know if people still do that, but I hope they do. I think it's those hours in the darkroom that I think are missing today. I shouldn't speak for that because I don't really know what goes on in classes. I don't know if students are still sitting there for hours and days and months printing, but I think that's maybe what's missing is not only the meditation that you go through, the thinking, but looking that image over and over and then seeing actually what those chemicals do instead of pushing a button, you know, on your computer.
I just remember the first time I made a color print. There was a drum that was spinning, and you put a piece of like mesh fabric over the paper, and it was the kind of machine that you could lose a finger in, and you're in total darkness, and the chemistry stinks, and you've already done all of the filtration and it's a real pain, incredibly difficult to do it yourself.
I never even knew that existed.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so it's just that, well, I think one of the, for people who write about photography, not to have experienced some of those things, I think is, they're missing part of the experience of what it means to make a color photograph, especially. All of those minute decisions in the darkroom. I remember at one point Kathy Opie told me that when you're trying to balance your color photograph, is it too red, is it too magenta, or too cyan? You know it's perfect when you don't know if it's too magenta or cyan. It's like halfway in between. It's this balancing point. But I always thought that analog color, which I'm so happy that we have digital now, because I could never really master analog color. It was like, just seemed like out of reach.
Oh, come on, I don't believe that.
I didn't have that kind of pitch that you have. But but to wind the clock back, there was so many frustrations with early color. And in fact, many photographers use labs. So they were able to allow people who spend many more hours balancing color. Not everyone though. But
Jim, let me start off by the first class that Mark had when he did his color class is he would show you about the cones of the eye and how how your eye sees color. So I don't know if every color photo teacher starts with that, but that if I go around and ask people, they know how your eye sees color. Most people don't know. Okay, so let's start with that. Then he went and started. We did a whole sort of couple of weeks on color theory, and we would read Itten and Albers and etc. And then also go through what color theory is. So that all stuck in my mind, just having that kind of beginning to the understanding of color.
Mm-hmm.
But don't forget, I think my biggest influence was my mother, who was a fashion model in the 30s, and then became an interior decorator. And she had a very specific taste in color that people would mention too, that had to do with pinks and turquoises and very specific colors like that. And I'm sure that rubbed off on me.
Mm-hmm. So that, recently you gave me a self-published book of your watercolors. Did you paint as an adolescent?
No.
Oh.
But my mother painted, she was a Sunday painter too, but I just started out of the blue. I just started painting my photographs. I would look. So my love of sort of watercolors is there.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually would photograph sort of, my own photographs. And what I liked about doing that is that I would dissect that photograph a million times more than if I just had printed it in the darkroom and looked at it. So studying it over and over by trying to paint it. So that was another way of sort of really looking very deeply into what I had done.
You told me that this book maybe originated during COVID?
It did,
when you were
definitely.
looking at your archives.
Well, I thought it was a good idea to go into them and start looking at them because there was nothing else to do, and I was living in a room where all the negatives were, where it was the playroom for my children, and so I've been sitting with those negatives, for years, decades, and I thought, okay, why not do this now?
So what was the process of?
I just started at the beginning. I had, albums with the negatives in them, and I'm very quick at whatever I do, and I would say, trash, 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 good, trash, trash. It was that kind of quick.
Did you throw out the bad
No,
ones?
no.
No?
No,
Snip, snip?
no. So I scanned them, and then the miracle is meeting Todd Lippy, because I don't, I think some
So
of
how
you.
many, but how many did you, like,
Did I go through?
no, how many did you arrive at, like the big selection?
I can't remember.
Maybe.
Maybe Todd remembers more than me, but I don't know if it was 100? 100?
Uh-huh.
Thank you. 100. Good. But, I edit very, very strictly anyway. I've never printed a lot of photographs, so
Mhm.
that was very much part of my sort of habit anyway.
And so the sequence in the book, it's not chronological.
Well, that sequence comes from Todd. Todd, please interrupt, but one of the things that I enjoyed so much about Todd's method and Chip Kidd, who designed a book called Players for me, is both designers I gave the scans to and said, take it away, without telling them one single thing about who the people were, what I was thinking about, not a word. And sort of like threw them up in the air and said, okay, take them. And I don't know if I would always do that, but I think it's a very good idea because I think that the artist gets so kind of protective of their own work that they can't disassociate themselves from it. And to give them to somebody who probably doesn't know, you didn't know me that well, right, at that point? So that was, and then he gave me back this dummy that I just flipped over.
I could not imagine doing that. Surrendering my images to someone else.
No,
You're brave.
I'm not that, protective of it. No, I don't know why. Oh, it was a gamble.
Was it, were you, what did you think when you looked at this old material? Were there pictures, obviously there must have been pictures you had no idea you had taken, but you remembered the circumstances.
I knew I'd taken them. I think I remembered which ones were sort of better ones anyway.
Yeah.
Because don't forget, I had been in the darkroom for 10 years
Right.
printing them, so I knew them quite well.
Were you also looking at prints then?
No, I just looked at the scans.
Yeah.
I looked at the prints because I didn't have many prints. I didn't keep many prints.
Right.
I think probably when I went to start printing or scanning them for the book and then went to LTI and met August and decided to start scanning them when we got to that point. Then I went back and looked at some of the older original prints that I had.
Because that's something that I also enjoyed, seeing the way color, the 1970s color, both the color of the world, especially some of those San Francisco pictures as a store where someone's exiting and it's
cactus shop.
a sort of browns and yellows, and they're not vibrant colors, but they're distinctive. To me, they ring 1970s.
So that's what's very interesting about that is that you wonder, or one wonders, okay, were those colors because I chose that place, or was it because of the film, was it because of the paper, or was it because of the time and the way people designed things at that time? I have a feeling it was because I was drawn to those specific places and chose those places. This was before I would tell somebody what to wear or anything like that. And then in the editing afterward, would say, okay, this fits in this situation. But there were certain things I was looking for at that time in 1979. I was desperately trying to get people to move, even way back then, before I went to the 4x5 camera. So that photograph and quite a few in this book are the very beginnings of directing. But I would never have directed at that time yet. Just would have needed to take more pictures to get to that point. But let's go back to the color. I think it just had to do with my choice. Oh, I like this place. This is my kind of store that I like. It was a cactus shop.
But I like to think, especially when I look at colored photographs from different decades, that each decade has its own, it's sort of a mixture of the palette of the times, but also the materials. The color of 1970s, the color palette of 70s film sort of aligns
No,
with
I love that. I think that's a great point. Because then
but also then to bring it into the present with the kind of like sonority of the color that your color person August worked with you on. To bring all of those things together in that harmony is one of the, to me, the fantastic achievements in this book, is bringing it all, from the negative to the printed page.
The other thing is, this goes back to, let's say fast forward, is when I was using the 4x5 and was taking all those pictures of the families, directing them, at one certain point, I would never tell anybody what to wear. I would let everything be natural. And then I got sort of bored, and I wanted to work with using color as a push and pull sort of device. And I decided in one photograph specifically to actually ask the family if I could look in their closets and choose clothes that would go and match the room. And there were a couple of reasons I wanted that. Number one, to show the style that people dressed in, the interiors they dressed in, and how people tend to wear clothes that look like their interiors. But also that it was the year that Ralph Lauren decided to make clothes in color coral. Therefore, a period piece, a part in history. When you look back and look at 19th century paintings, you say, okay, people were all wearing red at that time. So I was marking that also. So let's go back again to the San Francisco picture of 1979. It might have come from that time, that style. I hadn't even thought of that at that point.
Let's see, sort of flat-footed here.
Well, you know Slim Aaron's work. Do you know
Sorry.
Slim Aaron's?
No.
Oh, you don't? Oh, we gotta show you something. Well, Slim Aaron's was a commercial photographer, sort of fashion style, society photographer, and his pictures, my pictures kind of look like his. I didn't say his looked like mine.
Do his predate yours, or are they?
Definitely. And he would photograph my parents' generation. But they had this wonderful kind of soft pastel kind of feeling. Like Luigi Guidi, you know Luigi Guidi, the photographer? Luigi Guidi? His photographs had this sort of pastel-y kind of coloring too. Anyway.
No, it's fascinating, this relationship of the color of the world and the color of the materials that we produce it. Back to the sequences though, the black and white pictures, there's like, I was particularly struck by the squirming kids in the black and whites. There's this kind of like activity that's happening in a lot of those photographs. And there's one picture, juxtaposition, where a group of kids are on a tennis court. It's in black and white, and you can see this chain link fence. You're looking through it. And I was thinking today, it looks like a Leif Friedlander picture. It's perfect.
Well, yeah.
Leif Friedlander.
Oh.
And then opposite it is a ping pong table photograph with a single head looking at the subject. And I thought this is also the beginning of a Tina Barney vision. She's kind of abandoned this idea, and in the essay I used the expression slipping glimpses. People like Friedlander and other photographers photograph glimpses. And I got the term from de Kooning. De Kooning uses this idea that content is a glimpse. And de Kooning, of course, was good friends with Robert Frank. But this bringing de Kooning into a discussion of photography was something I was very excited to do in the essay, to have this idea of the slipping glimpse, which the squirming kids and the many of the photographs have that fluidity, but then you adopt a different. The slipping glimpse is something that we begin to see in the rearview mirror at the end of the book. So it was nice to think about the squirming black and whites, and then the kind of order of the color.
But this is the pleasure of having a great designer, again Todd Libby, because I might not have even thought of that, and so Todd put those two pictures together. I wouldn't have probably thought of that. I might not have thought of that. So, that's a great treat when someone designs a book and brings out things that you might not have known about yourself. Can I just point out something about this cover too? I mean, a lot of people ask me, what are my primary sort of not first choice of what's the most important thing in putting a photograph together. They always think it has to do with the people and the fancy room and all that kind of stuff. those were just the tools. What always is important, and what has been from the very beginning, are the formal parts of putting a picture together. And this picture here, my love of this picture here is this one green square. And I don't know why that fascinates me so much, but I think it's the kind of thing that wouldn't happen in any other medium. I mean, I really think it's a phenomenon because it looks like it was sort of pasted on top of the photograph. So that has a lot to do with the reasons I choose things and sort of place people the way they are, or decide to take a picture at that time. Now the children is a whole other thing, because the children are wild and crazy. They were around. I didn't have to do a thing. They were just definitely slipping around. So.
I noticed that rectangle appears in other photographs too. There's a rectangle and another one that was just, at least two others. And then there's that snow picture where the rectangle goes from the upright to...
It's funny how artists go back to these sort of, not fetishes or things that they like, and they keep going back to them, and sometimes they don't know why. I'm sure if you asked any artist, they'd say, oh, I like this or I like that. But there's something about the square. I think, well, it has to do with space and trying to create space, or an optical illusion or something like that.
But again, this is something that, looking in the viewfinder, it's a 35mm camera is very hard to see until you see it printed. Because then in the print, it becomes amplified.
Then it's too late. I mean,
no, but then you learn that perhaps accidentally.
Oh, I have to go back and do it again.
Yeah.
Teacher. Oh, good.
The other thing was this bringing in Balanchine. The idea of, I was really amazed when I read the description of the Balanchine dance, where he incorporates this chance, the dancers being blinded by the sunlight, and incorporates that into the dance. And I thought, what a great metaphor for an alert photographer who sees these gestures as if it's a kind of, it's communicating something. And of course, in photography, it's communicating light. And dance is just an activity, it's a upraised arm. But for Tina, it's on page.
Oh, I think you're thinking of this one here.
Yeah, it's on page 81.
So this one here.
Two people are going like this, but that the Balanchine anecdote was bouncing around, and I was so happy to be able to use it because it seemed like it said something about incorporating the random. That photography is the medium that incorporates these random instances. I mean, dance to some extent. You always think of Cunningham in incorporating randomness, but to hear that Balanchine had done this, he was like a great photographer.
Are you talking about phenomena, or do you know? Does phenomena have something to do?
Just visual stuff that's happening, and photographing it.
Yeah.
In the early work, that's what you're. To me, that seems that's one of the through lines to some extent. But then you move away from that, and there's a little bit more control.
Definitely. So.
And the exhibition, it was interesting to see the show because there were many pictures in the show that I did not think were in the book. So the experience of seeing the exhibition, and of course they were all in the book. It was interesting to then look at these two versions of the work. One is the book, the beautiful book, and the other was in the show, walking this sort of, how did you sequence the exhibition?
Well, we put all the photographs down on the floor, and I mean, this was done with Emma Bowen, who I work with at Casman, which was a pleasure. And basically, you sort of start putting sort of sequences together that look sort of like a diptych. And what's fantastic, and which is a real treat, is got a couple of guys that work at Casman that can put the pictures up and then move them very quickly when you change your mind. And that, if anybody's tried to hang their own show, you know, would be your dream. And that's really how it's done, because there's no other way you can try it. And so that's really how we did it. But they had to do with similarities. I can't point it out right now, but I think you can kind of guess in the book of just pairs and things that go together. And I think hanging a show is one of the most exciting things an artist can experience. And luckily I had the experience of being able to do that with Paul Casman. And that was probably one of the great treats I ever had, is something about his eye and where to place a work of art. And you know, I hope everybody gets that chance.
The work is relatively small. Did you think of making large prints of any of these?
No, because
Yeah.
I would think everybody would know that makes a photograph to make a 35mm photograph big. And I've tried it. Isn't really very sort of appealing. It just doesn't, it looks mushy, really. But also I really wanted to try something small after making big pictures for so long, and I really loved it. Because then you see the photograph in a very different way. It becomes an object, and I have to think about, I can't think right now of what the difference is, but it's a great learning lesson to make your work in different sizes. So I really enjoyed it.
You were also able to, you know, increase the number of, like, you know, pictures.
Sure.
By working smaller.
Yeah, because if you figure, most of the time when I showed at Janet Borden, I would show 9 pictures every other year.
Mm.
That's not a lot of pictures. And, you know, so I can't remember how many were in the show, but definitely many more than that.
What are you working on now?
I've been using my 8x10, which I'm in love with.
What kind?
I have a, Mitch, what kind? Phillips, sorry. Luckily, Mitch is sitting here.
This is a camera
when-
made by a dentist.
Well, let me tell you how I know about it, because I started off, I had my first 4x5 was a Toyo, which is a metal camera, and then I thought, I'm gonna get an 8x10. I got a Toyo 8x10. Well, I could hardly lift it up with the tripod. And Jan Groover, my friend who I made a film about, who was the master of 8x10, said, Tina, you've got to get this camera. This is in the 90s, made by these 2 dentists, that it was like lifting up a hat, a light hat, after having experienced the other camera. I still have that same camera. Mitch has one too. And in the 90s, I used that 8x10 as fast as I used the 4x5. I just flip it over my shoulder and use it that way. Well, this time I decided I was tired of trying to go out and find people to be in my pictures, which is a real pain and always has been. And I decided to work inside my house, which I'd never photographed in before, and I never really wanted to do that. And now I think, I also found an assistant, which makes a big difference, but now I think I might take sometimes 2 hours to make one picture. And I really, really welcome that. And what goes on inside my mind, having all that time, not having to rush, not having to feel like I'm bothering somebody or they have to go off to do something more interesting than what they're doing by posing, instead of posing for me. So that's what I'm doing. There's still life without people in them. Okay, and I'm also photographing some paintings and art that's in my house, using that as a narrative. But the more important part about these pictures, if I decided to show them, is the installation and the context of what should be next to the other and what size they should be in. So anyway, that's what I'm doing.
So these are, I mean, in the best sense, they're highly controlled.
Very.
I mean, so that you're going to have, you'll get the film, you'll get the proofs, and then you can actually go back and compare them to.
I can.
Or that you'll be intimate understanding of what you photographed.
Very much so. Just the whole slowness of it is so sort of unlike me. I'm also going to try some black and white too, and see what that's like. So that's what I'm doing. Who knows whether it'll be interesting or not. But